Kia ora, Aotearoa. No Wairarapa aho ko kaiwhakaahua aho ko Christopher Cookson toko ingoa. Hi, I'm a photographer, or well, as a hobby at least, and I live in Marlborough. And I thought for Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, I've got 20 photos of some different places around Marlborough that have actually got Māori place names, some that are pretty well known, some that are not, and even some of the well known ones are not actually pronounced very well. So I thought I was going to go through and first off I'll see if you're able to guess the names, and also I'll do my best at pronouncing them myself, and if I know a bit about the story behind them I'll try and share some of the story around some of the names. So Oku whenua. Okay, probably lots of people in Marlborough know this one, we should do, but it often gets mispronounced and I've heard all sorts of weird pronunciations. Well, this is actually, here we go, Waiouru, which literally means the footsteps of Uanuku. Now, Uanuku, from what I can find out, it has several meanings. It can mean a rainbow, or it can also, Uanuku was one of the ancestors who came from Hawaii, and it's a pretty significant maunga, or mountain, because it's actually the tallest mountain outside the Southern Alps. So you can see it from all around Marlborough and even from the North Island. So, but I've heard all sorts of pronunciations, Tapi, Tapuanuku, and all sorts of other things, but it's probably reasonably good to get that right because it's fairly significant. Okay, here's the next one. Most people should know this. It's our awa here in Marlborough, and actually gave the name to the region before we started calling it Marlborough, the Wairarapa. But often I hear that pronounced as Wairarapa. Well, hopefully you're not having a row on the Y, but people do row their boats on it at the Waiouru rowing club. So maybe that can give you a little bit of a clue how to pronounce it a bit better. And from what I understand, I think, well, Y is pretty obvious. It's water, and uro, I think, can either mean 100 or many. And that's probably because it's a braided river, which is quite important ecologically in New Zealand. They're quite unique. Only a few countries have braided river systems. So Waiouru is quite special because of that. It's a representation of something unique to New Zealand. Okay, this is where I live, and it's not too hard to pronounce. Te Waihare. Most people know it as Blenheim, but the original Pākehā name for Te Waihare was probably a lot closer to what Te Waihare means. So it was called the beaver, and for similar reason, because the early settlers thought it was like a beaver's swamp because it flooded often. And Te Waiharekeke is literally the waters of flax. So I don't know why, but we Pākehā have a instinct for building towns on top of swamps, and Otahi, or Christchurch, is much the same, which turns out to be not very good when you have earthquakes. But fortunately, not all of Blenheim's on liquefaction zone. But yeah, so that's where that name came from. And thankfully, there's actually been quite a bit of replanting of harakeke following some around the river that runs through town. Next one, you should know this is Opawa. A lot of people are used to seeing this as Opawa. It was misspelt, and well, I can understand that. I'm actually a bit deaf myself, and you can imagine early settlers hearing Opawa, but not used to the pronunciation of the Māori vowel sounds, so it got corrupted into Opawa. But the spelling has been corrected so that, to make it easier for people to understand how to pronounce it correctly. So Opawa is better pronunciation, and so that's not really a new name. It's just trying to correct the name to help people pronounce it correctly. Now, I've got another maunga here, and probably next to Tapuai o Nuku, this is probably the next most significant one for people who live in Blenheim. Now, the proper name is Te Hau. Most people probably know this as the Ned. Well, I've done quite a bit of research, talked to historians, and even come up with my own idea for why it's called the Ned. And it's not actually really very meaningful. What I did find was a Scottish explorer travelling around in the Awatere Valley named a lot of the mountains with Scottish names. And about the time he was doing that, a Ned was a bit of a Scottish ruffian. And so that's the best theory I can come up with for why it's called the Ned. It's not called Ned as in a person, just the Ned. So I think the idea of him being a bit cheeky and calling it a Scottish ruffian might have been where it got that name from, which isn't really very meaningful. But Te Hau is a lot more meaningful. It is another Māori ancestor, and it's actually supposed to be the reclining face of Te Hau. And if you look carefully, there is a nose and some bushy eyebrows and a chin. And now that I've heard that story about the mountain, it's much easier for me to remember that than the Ned. And it's actually a pretty cool story that we've got this big face watching over us here in Blenheim. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay, this one is another, I'll go on and name it. This is Te Koko o Kupe. Now, Kupe was another one of the great explorers from Hawaii, and well, just as we Pākehā like to name things after explorers, like just out to the left of this picture, you've got what we like to, most of us call Cook Strait. Well, Kupe got here long before Cook did, and this area here, which most of us know is Cloudy Bay, is actually named after him. So, well, I think if we're going to name places after explorers and voyagers, well, we've got Kupe, who there's quite a few places actually around here that are named after him because he was pretty significant. Next, everyone's favourite swimming beach, who lives in Blenheim, but you maybe don't know the Māori name for it. Pukatea. Most of you probably know this as White's Bay, but it was actually known as Pukatea long before it was known as White's Bay. And it is a pretty cool beach, though unfortunately a bit cool in terms of the water too. But it's a nice place. And what have we got next? Now, for those, probably Marlborough's other most well-known beach, or at least our well-known beach town, but you might not know what it's known as. Waitahi. This is Picton for most of you, but Picton, I didn't know that Picton ever actually came here. So we seem to have quite a few names of people who never, or places that don't have much connection with where we are, but Waitahi is the original name here, and you still actually find it in places around, like there's Waitahi Wharf at the port, and there are other places around that actually use the name. So I'm not sure why we got landed with Picton, which if you say with a snuffly nose sounds like Pigton, which is a bit funny. So Waitahi is the original name here. Okay. Now we have a big area of moana, and the original local name for this, Tōtaranui. Some of you may know this as Queen Charlotte Sound, and those of you into outdoor pursuits may have done the Queen Charlotte track. Well, if we're going to start using the original name for Queen Charlotte Sound, then maybe we should look at coming up with alternative name for Queen Charlotte Track too. Maybe Te Hikoi or Tōtaranui, something like that. And because really Queen Charlotte didn't come here, and I could imagine some queen sitting over there in Europe is probably, we are not amused. What are we going to do with a piece of water? We are not interested in bathing, and we definitely do not want to spend 3 months on a leaky boat traveling to the other side of the world. But so yes, I'm not sure why it got named Queen Charlotte Sound, but Tōtaranui is the name that it had before that. Next up, now this is a pretty famous spot. It's pretty popular for swimming, and it's had a few hobbits or dwarves and barrels floating down here. But you may not know the original name for it. Te Hoere. I hope I got that more or less right. Well, the Pākehā name for this is Pelorus, and that actually makes a bit of sense because it was HMS Pelorus, a ship that that came in, and it was the first Pākehā exploration of the area. So that sort of makes a little bit of sense, although I think they changed the spelling of it in the process of naming it Pelorus. So we, just like I mentioned a few slides back with Opawa, got the spelling wrong, so people couldn't pronounce it right. Well, sometimes we don't seem to even be able to spell our own names properly, because I think the name of the ship might have been spelt with a Y, but now Pelorus is spelt with an E. But anyway, before it got that name, it was known to local Māori as Te Hoere. And just like in English, the river is known as the Pelorus, and will also have Pelorus Sound. To Māori, it was exactly the same. The river and the sound that extended from the mouth of the river were all known as Te Hoere. Yeah. Okay, this is pretty well known, and well, it's our second most important wine region around this awa, but it's also one that gets really mutilated in pronunciation a lot of the time. So it's Awateri. It's not Awat tree. It's not a it's not a tree with a river coming out of it. Well, actually, it wouldn't even be a tree with a river coming out of it, because Awat tree is totally wrong. It's Awateri. One thing about Māori, it's actually pretty easy to pronounce, is once you get the vowel sounds, is you actually say the letters that are in the word. I've never seen an A pronounced like an I, so and it has got an E in the middle, so I can't figure out how people manage to pronounce it as Awatri instead of Awateri, but it happened, so hopefully you can do better. Now, this is probably one of the remotest parts of the region. This, I think, have I got it right? And island is Motu, actually the biggest island in the region under that cloud layer, and it's on my bucket list to visit. I haven't been there yet. Now, its name in Te Reo Māori is Rangitoto Kititonga. For those of us who are not familiar with that name, the Pākehā name is D'Urville Island. Now, it's one of the largest islands in New Zealand, and it's definitely the largest one in Marlborough, and it's got some pretty amazing landscapes from what I've seen from photos, and from this image that I took from a plane, you can see it's a pretty interesting place to visit. Okay, this is, I think, the southernmost awa in what's currently known as Marlborough, or the Marlborough district at least. But this is a funny story about why it's actually a good idea to learn some Te Reo Māori before you start giving names to places. Because there's quite an embarrassing story about this. Okay, here's the Māori name is the Waimā, which literally means white water. Well, there are some other places in the world with some white water as well, and well, it's because of the limestone. And there's some English guy who had no knowledge of Te Reo Māori came along and decided that it reminded him of have a place in Britain called the Waiouru River. So he called this the Waiouru River after the Waiouru in the UK, which, well, fine, it reminded him of home. But what he didn't know is that the word URE in Te Reo Māori means penis, which when you see on the bridge with the dual naming, Uri, Waima River, that sounds distinctly rude, given that the Māori name means Waima, because people look at it and don't realise that Ewer is actually a river in the UK, and they think, and it looks like the river is being called the Penis Whitewater River, which you can imagine how that comes across. I think Marlborough probably might want to drop the English name to avoid confusion, because someone who doesn't realise that that's English, supposed to be English, might get the wrong idea and think we've got some rather indecent names for our places here. Okay, this is, well, technically it's not part of Marlborough district anymore, but it was part of Marlborough when I was a kid. And one of the things I want to point out with place names, some of the Pākehā boundaries that we set up were quite arbitrary and didn't actually correspond to boundaries of rohi for local iwi. So this was Marlborough up until 1989, but then it became part of Kaikoura district. But it's another place that often gets mispronounced and annoys me quite a bit, because I can read, and so this is actually Kekering. I'm not sure whether I was supposed to have had a macron on that or not, but hopefully I've got it right. But the common thing that I hear is Kekering. There's people have a tendency to drop letters, but it does actually have a U on the end, and it's pronounced. And it's actually quite a nice place to explore. Most people just drive past or possibly stop in at the store, but actually exploring up this is up the back of Kekering, and there's actually quite a story about it in Māori tradition, and I can't remember the details, but I think there was a bit of a fight and someone might have got killed for stealing someone's wife. I'm not sure whether that's quite how it went, but there was something significant happened there. I don't know enough about the history, but there are some quite interesting traditions around there that it's worth finding more out about. Now, this is another nice spot, another small awa, one of the tributaries of the Wairarapa. But this is a case of probably someone like me who's a bit deaf. They heard the Māori name but misheard it and started mispronouncing it. So it's recently been renamed to properly reflect the correct pronunciation. And so this is Ohini Mahuta, but you're probably used to hearing it as Onomaluto. Well, you can sort of see how you could get from Ohini Mahuta to Onomaluto if you're a bit deaf and didn't hear it right. So this isn't a renaming, this is just a correction. So we can actually pronounce the name of the place the way it was intended to be originally. And I think that's great that sometimes making mistakes is fine, but once you recognise that you made a mistake, actually correcting them is a good thing to do. So it might take a bit of getting used to, but this is the original and correct name for this lovely spot. Yeah. Anyone who's been on the ferry, Te Waka, should know this place. It's where the ships pass from the South Island, Te Waka Maui, into Cook Strait, which I can't actually apologise for not remembering the Maori name for Cook Strait, but then to the north you can see Te Ika Maui. So, but this is quite a wild bit of water with really strong tidal flows and quite narrow, known as Kura Te O. But most people will probably think of it as Tory Channel. And I think Tory Channel's not so bad as a Pākehā name, because I think the ship, the Tory, did actually sail through here, so it's not naming it after some British politician or something who never actually came here. It was, but Kura Te O, it was already had a name before then, and that's this one. Next, this is some of the wild landscape up the back of Marlborough, or one of the tributaries of the Wairarapa. Now, it only has a Māori name, but a lot of people don't know how to pronounce it properly. It's Waihopai, not Waihopi. P-A-I isn't pronounced as P. And there's some pretty spectacular country up here. I just love it. Unfortunately, most of it's on private land, but I think if you ask nicely, I think some tramping clubs go up there. But yeah, so that's another one of our awa here in Marlborough. Go to the next one. Well, you can see in the background here Te Hau, it looks really quite like the chin and the nose and the forehead of the sleeping ancestor. But we've got this river here that it actually has a Māori name, Omaka. Most of you who are familiar with Marlborough will probably know this as the Taylor River. And the Taylor is actually an okay name because it's actually named after Blenheim's first blacksmith. And so it was actually someone who lived here, but maybe not for the best reasons. He wasn't a great explorer. He was the first blacksmith and he travelled around, but there's a story about him getting stuck up a tree and spending the night up a tree terrified because of some wild pigs. So he's not, it's a bit of a funny story, whereas I'm not sure about the origins of Omaka, and some of you might, who are paying attention, might say, well, hey, there's another Omaka river out to the west. And yes, there is, but because of flood protection works, the Omaka River was actually diverted. So, and what we know as the Taylor was actually one of the tributaries, a small tributary of the Omaka, and before it was diverted, it was actually the Omaka that flowed through Blenheim, and this is just one part of it, one small part of it, which we now know as the Taylor, but the whole area was known as Omaka, which still stands. Like we have Omaka Marae, and we have Omaka Airfield, and out behind the Taylor Dam, we have the Omaka Domain. So that whole area was known as Omaka. Now, finally, my last slide, which is actually reasonably significant because this is out. I don't know whether you can see it in this photo. It might be just possible to see, but out to the right, there's in this area, there's actually a small island, which I don't know whether it's possible to see. It was actually the site of the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi in the South Island, Te Waiponamu. That's where the South Island point of signing, and this is also the area where the first Pākehā to live in the South Island settled because of the whaling and sealing. So there were actually Pākehā here before the Treaty of Waitangi, and they settled in this area. But most people probably aren't aware of the Māori name for the area, which is Te Whanganui, but it's commonly known as Port Underwood. This is certainly quite significant because it's one of the first places of Māori Pākehā interaction on a long-term basis, and also the signing of the treaty happened here. So, okay, that's I've got one last, okay. Yep, this is another pretty significant geographical feature that's visible in Marlborough, especially anyone in the Wairarapa should recognise it. Now, it's known as Te Parinui Uwhiti, also known as the Vernon Bluffs. This was, as I said earlier, the Pākehā definitions of boundaries are often quite arbitrary and don't correspond to boundaries that existed previously. And I'm not sure whether I've got it right, but I've got an idea that this actually marked tribal boundaries, and to the south of this was Ngāi Tahu, and to the north had the other iwi that occupied Wairarapa, and areas to the north, the Marlborough Sound. So that's the last of my Marlborough places. So I've shared a few of my photos and some of the place names. It's been a bit of a learning experience for me with some of them. Some of them I already knew about. Hopefully I haven't done too badly with my pronunciation, but I'd encourage people to get out there and have a go anyway. That some of these places have some amazing stories behind them, and I think that's just a little bit from me for Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. So that's it from me, and ahura.